Hi, everyone. Ken Anderson here at IntelliChief. If you're here for the automating PO and Non-PO Invoice presentation for the Infor ERP applications, XA, LX, System 21, LN, BPCS, etc., you're in the right spot, and we'll get started in 1 minute. Thanks. All right, let's get started. My name is Ken Anderson, and I'm here at IntelliChief. And this what presentation today will focus around some of the Infor ERP systems, LX, XA, BPCS, System 21. I think we touch on PRMS, but that whole thing. So if you're using any one of the ones that I mentioned, then you're in the right spot. So let's get started. So what we're going to talk about first is, I saw a couple existing customers that use us for something related to implement in their ERP system. But for some of the people that maybe we don't know us, who we are, what we do, you might have one of our products installed there and not even know it. So we'll talk a little bit about us. Some of the AP challenges, because that's what we're focused on here today. Automating PO and non-PO. What are the goals we see? What are some of the things that to really think about from an automation perspective that really help promote SDP or straight through processing and getting more touchless processing, if you will, on the invoice side. Now, this all applies conceptually to sales orders or your HR or things like that. So take everything we say, we'll sort of think about how the concept works. But today we're going to be focused really on the AP side. What are some of the various integrations? Okay, so I'll talk about those, and they're different depending on if I'm using XA, for example, versus System 21, they're two totally different things, but there is an integration for both, and we'll touch on what some of the things are that we have to touch in your core ERP from Infor, and then wrap it up from there. So any questions, just write them down along the way, and by all means, we'll get them answered. So who are we? What do we do? We always like to start off telling people, because it used to come up all the time, why is this product and why are you guys called IntelliChief? Well, we decided to just start telling people. So originally, when we started the organization, we were trying to come up with the name, way back when, and it was Intelligence for Chief Executives. And so we said, let's call it IntelliChief. And that's where the name comes from. So what is IntelliChief? Well, it's obviously us as a company, but the product we're going to be talking about here primarily is our IntelliChief product, which is an ECM tool, or Enterprise Content Management System. And so what ECM is it manages effectively lifecycle content throughout your entire organization, right? So we integrate with the core system. So today we're talking about Infor and any other business applications that are sort of around the edges that allow us to accomplish the mission that you as a customer are trying to achieve. So for example, some people come and say, I'm looking to automate my onboarding process in human resource. Well, you use the same tool that we're talking about today, and then you just expand it into AP or automating the sales, preventing keying of sales orders, et cetera, et cetera. So enterprise content management is really used to help the entire enterprise, but customers typically will implement it for the things that are important to them at the time, and then use it for other stuff, once it's in there. So you do see us obviously a lot in accounts payable within really all of the sectors we work in, just because it's such an obvious and visible problem within the organization. So that's what ECM is and what our product does. So us, I'm here at our world headquarters here in Tampa, Florida. North American headquarters is in Mansfield, Massachusetts. So if you're, I saw a couple customers online that use Formtastic, for example, or FastFax, or one of our other solutions offered by Infor. That's where you're calling. Our support team is headquartered here in Mansfield, Massachusetts, which is just outside Boston, and that's where you guys are calling for support. So we're an Oracle Gold partner. We're an Infor solution partner. We've got hundreds of customers out there, and we really focus on the concept of best practices in a particular business area. Like today, we're talking about, procure to pay or accounts payable, primarily. Here's some of our customers. I like to call it the sort of requisite software company slide that shows, a bunch of logos of people that use our solution. But chances are, if you're using any one of the ERPs that I mentioned before, you probably, and some of the customers that use it, that chances are one of ours. It's by far the most implemented solution for AP, order processing, etc., in the Infor space. So as I mentioned, we're an Infor solution partner. You probably know, if you're an XA user, our friend Ross Freeman over there. But Infor selected IntelliChief, what they call IntelliChief paperless process management, or Infor IntelliChief document management, as their solution for system-wide products. So the integration is supported by Infor. In fact, you actually don't buy IntelliChief from us as an organization. You buy it from whoever you buy your regular Infor stuff from, whether that's an affiliate on the XA side, direct from Infor themselves, etc. That's who quotes and delivers the solution. So it's Infor vetted. It's been on Infor paper, so to speak, or an Infor product since 2009. And you get support through Extreme, and effectively it is an extension of your core business application. So this is, as I mentioned, we're talking a lot about AP, but it's flexible enough where it could expand within your organization for those other things. And it's interesting, we have customers who sometimes, we got a call recently, in fact, where someone on a controller on the accounts payable side, that managed accounts payable, say, hey, we saw one of your presentations somewhere. I'd love to talk to you about IntelliChief. And I said, well, you could talk to us, but you could also just go, waltz over to customer service, because they've been using it for years. So, I don't know how big you are, some of the folks on the call, but you might have us in there already. All right, let's talk about the AP side and dig into some of the specifics with respect to accounts payable and, really why we're all here. So, validating invoices, and this has become more prevalent recently with respect to a couple of versions of Infor ERP systems where matching has changed a little bit. So when people come to us, usually these are the things they're trying to fix, right? Comparing and verifying, or doing your matches, right? Your 2- or 3-way match, or in some cases more, depending on what your business looks like. But having to compare that stuff manually before keying it into the system, or in some ERPs where you have to key an invoice into invoice entry before you even can see if something's been received or not. Okay, so that's one of the things that comes up. Unit of measure conversions, so where your ordering quantities are, unit of measure is different than your invoice unit of measure, is a big one. Approvals, so typically folks who have expense invoices and multiple locations, that comes into play, where you're having to have remote coding of invoices or remote approvals, and or high human error risk. So those are some of the big ones we hear about along the way, and we'll talk about a couple more along the way. But also discounts, right? Losing discounts or not measuring them at all to qualify for early pay discounts. That's another one we hear, people want to take advantage of that. So let's get into automating it, how it works, right? The goals of what people do and what they say to us when they want to implement something like this. Well, the biggest by far, and most definitely within the Infor space as well, again, XA, System 21, LX, BPCS, PRMS, et cetera, people want to stop keying stuff, right? They want to stop having AP doing manual data entry. That's by far the number one thing we hear. Realize this concept of straight-through processing. If you're not familiar with straight-through processing it is essentially, think about the PO side, where an invoice comes in, the system reads what's on that invoice from the vendor, right? A piece of paper, unstructured data. The system reads what's on it, looks to the receipts to see if it's been received, looks to the PO to ensure that this is the things we ordered. All that stuff matches, and it creates a voucher in the system. That's what straight-through processing is. Okay, so that's what we're after, and that's what you should be after, and what most of the folks who we work with are after. Early pay discounts we talked about. Data entry errors. You're not doing data entry anymore, so that sort of goes away, right? Duplicate payments. That's another one that comes up. How do I prevent duplicate payments? Because folks are just getting in invoices and just hammering away, trying to get the volume out of the way. Eliminating those. Knowing what's happening in the process, right? Do I have a slow pay vendor? Do I have a slow pay customer, for example? Do I have a vendor who's constantly sending me things that don't match what we ordered? Do I have somebody who is in the chain of approval who always takes too long that it causes us to, have our lights go out, whatever the thing is? Automating everything that is matching today, right? Have people who are in the AP team focus only on the exceptions or things that don't match or things that really need somebody to look at, right? Some folks want to deploy or reallocate resources to a different area, or they're growing and don't want to bring on back office. Happens all the time. Business continuity plan, where a hurricane hits and we have our data systems are all squared away. We have ability to, bring up a new system. We can get XA up in this other location or LX or what have you, but we don't have access to unstructured content, right? What used to be in a file cabinet, well, bringing it into an ECM or content management system eliminates that, right? It can back it up along with everything else. So why do people do it? Well, this is from our friends at Aberdeen Group that, someone who's just manually keying, manual match, all that stuff, 16.3 days to process an invoice versus an automated system, which is 2.9 days to process an invoice. And that equals cost. So $16 versus $3.34 to process an invoice, right? And that's one of the drivers of why we're trying to accomplish this, is to drive down that cost of back office, which is typically an overlay cost. Realizing 20% of early pay discounts versus realizing 90%, or at least being able to choose how many early pay discounts you want to get, right? If you're, whatever your business situation is and the cost of money is high, well, I want to recognize those faster, but just having the ability to be able to make a decision about it because now you have data, right? So interesting, just a real quick story, because I just heard it last Friday, was we have a customer of ours. They're also an Infor customer. They have to use what's called ERP XA, and they went from, in just 90 days, cutting their cycle time in half. Okay, so we measure it at the beginning, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, they cut their cycle time in half on both PO and non-PO, which was fantastic. All right, let's dig into the product and sort of how this thing works, right? So you can get a feel for understanding, what you do today and what the system does in terms of, getting through to that straight-through processing thing. So invoices, right? The vendors send invoices into the department. That's how it works today, right? And so we might be able to modify that slightly by changing, a vendor emails it to you or something like that, but that continues to happen. So vendors send in the invoices the same way they do today. They fax them in, email them, they, whatever their given approach is today. Now, the first thing that happens now when you're talking with IntelliChief is, regardless of how they come in, they get processed directly into the document management portion of the IntelliChief product and put into workflow. Okay, so if you can get them emailed, it's fantastic from from the vendor, because we can just, that's already an image, right? It's already digital. It comes in and we turn around and put it right into workflow. If it's a physical piece of paper someone has to open in the mail, well, I've got to get that into a digital format, and so someone's going to have to scan that document. That's why folks are moving away from scanning altogether and really trying to get vendors to email things in. But we don't care however you want to do it. The next step is, once it's now into the system as a digital format and put through workflow, is this concept of what we use, Capture Enterprise. And what Capture Enterprise is a tool that we have that uses OCR engines to actually read the text off of the document, right, and convert it into data that we can then use the rest of the way through this process. Okay, so the Capture Enterprise is the piece that does that. And so what does it look like? Well, on the right here, you can see an image on, from an invoice from somebody. And what it's done is it's read the header data here, it's read all the line item detail, it's read the footer, and it's converted that into the data that you see on the left-hand side there. Now, the only time somebody's actually going to see this is if something has happened where within our level of competence in the tool, we want to show this to someone to make sure that it is in fact reading it correctly. It's 100% confident in all the things you see on the left-hand side. The one in red there, it's highlighting and saying, this is what we read, is this correct? If it's 100% confident or within your confidence level, the user doesn't even see it. So that's the capture part. Now we put in the workflow rules, right? Now we have the data. What somebody used to key into invoice entry, we now have that data, and now we can do things with it, right? We can determine, do we match this? Is this non-PO? Should we send this out to, Ken for approval? Whatever your business process, we build into our workflow, and then that's where we can now take action against the data that we have, okay? So all along the way, we've also captured our image, right? We've taken an image of that invoice that we can always go back to if we need to see it. We've taken the data off it, non-automatically indexed, and put it away into the IntelliChief archive. And so if I want to see that, I can go to invoice inquiry and press a button and pull it up so I can view it on the screen. And or PO inquiry if I match it against the PO, etc. All that good stuff. That's now captured into the system. Now we're going to do the matching of our PO base, and this again is based on your matching procedure, right? So if you have certain kinds of invoices that have a three-way match and others that have a two-way match, the system is going to do that for the user. The user doesn't have to see that unless there's some exception that they need to view, right? And so this becomes a game of managing the exceptions and bringing those exceptions down to get more straight through process. So the first thing we do is we take the PO invoices and we say, put those through the matching process. We go back to LX or System 21 or XA or whatever you're using for your ERP system. We read your receipt table and read the PO table. So what we ordered, what we received, and then try to accomplish that match. Non-PO, right? We do the same procedure. We read the invoice, but now we don't have the GL information. We don't have a PO to go back to make sure you ordered it. So this has to be routed for some type of approval. And this is depending on how your business operates as well. So if you have managers in the field who code invoices, that's perfectly okay. We'll read the codes, GL codes directly out of the ERP, present them to the end user. And the user doesn't even have to be an Infor user. They can use IntelliChief to go ahead and look up GL codes right in the system, right? Assuming you do it this way. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't have on non-PO, all the AP team GL codes it and then sends it out for approval, we can automate that process too. So the user doesn't even have to see it. It routes through your approval process. And you can see that over on the left-hand side here. This is a workflow queue. And what it's saying is, here there's X number of invoices to review. This one's out waiting to be verified. This one's waiting for receipts, et cetera, so you don't lose visibility of everything. So what does it look like when I have to do something, right? Well, this user was sent an alert that said, you have to do something. So this one says the stage was invoice is not matched. and it's asking the user, hey, we think we match this. Can you select from this question and say, are they matched? And these questions that are asked are specific to you. So if I send this out to Ken for approval, it would say the same thing. Ken, do you approve this invoice? It's whatever. And it could be based on our workflow rules that say Ken approves up to $100, and then, Jill approves from 101 to 200. Okay. And now, once all that stuff has happened, right, it's been routed, it's been approved, etc., we do what's called an export stage in our workflow and automatically create the voucher in the ERP system that you use. Okay, so you don't have to do that. If all this stuff happened and it happened correctly, right, my matching happened, my PO matched my receipt, matched my invoice, came into the system, we checked to make sure all those things were good. The next thing you would see is a voucher created in the ERP system. And then the voucher number populated back to our, back to IntelliChief through our two-way communication with the various ERP systems. So if I want to retrieve it later on, right, I can go to wherever a user would generally get up out of their chair and then go get a document. So if I'm in Invoice Inquiry and I want to see an invoice, I press a button, it will launch the invoice. And at this time in the procedure, I would see everything associated with this particular invoice. So I'd see a copy of the purchase order, the invoice. If I wanted the bill of lading or packing list here, I could see that. If I wanted the check or ACH information to appear here, you can see there's thumbnails down the bottom, but it's basically a picture of everything that happened within this particular transaction. Good for audits, obviously, as we start to get into audit season here in the next couple of months. So how does it do this from an integration standpoint with the various ERPs, right? So we know it has to be part of the core, business application, because that's the system of record, right? So, IntelliChief is fantastic, but it's not the system of record your core ERP is. So IntelliChief effectively passes the AP, and this is a part of the integration for the various ERP systems. And again, it doesn't matter whether you use, AFM, IFM, you're on LX, etc. It's slightly different, but the concept is the same. Where we pass that AP invoice data once we validated that it's correct through an interface with those ERP systems created for us, that ensures that the voucher that we're creating in the system is correct. And if it's not, it actually sends us back, communicates that information back to us so that a user knows that there's something that they have to look at. So all of our solutions have a Infor provided interface, and it protects the integrity, obviously, of the system and database that you're using. So we don't update the tables directly. It's funny I say that, but there are actually a couple of examples, early releases of certain ERPs where we built an integration to do that. But I think the majority of the folks on this call that doesn't apply to. But it minimizes the number of transaction processing errors, right? Because you get to a month end, you have to be on, everything has to foot, if you will. Okay, so we include what's called real-time database lookups. So those are all set up too. In your Infor ERPs, we actually have package and integrations already built. And so what the database lookup does is that's what is doing the lookup to your receipt table. You don't enter any of that stuff into IntelliChief. We're reading it from your core ERP to ensure it's valid in real time. And so real time is really important because when an invoice comes in, right, it's going to check and see if everything receipt-wise, PO-wise matches at that time. If it doesn't, it puts it into a hold queue and waits. Then as soon as someone receives it at any location, it's going to update the receipt table. We have access to reading that, and we're going to automatically, try our match again at that point. So we do two-way match, three-way match. If you have another unique matching process, we could do that and create the voucher in the ERP. So those are some of the obvious integration points on the AP side. There's more on the order side, but we're not talking about orders today. But just as examples, these are the things you need to be able to do straight-through processing. So here's a couple examples of real-time lookups. Validation, reading the supplier table, reading the PO table. I think this is an XA one, but as an example, again, read them all. So, we're an Infor solution partner for the ERPs that we mentioned. So in this example, we're reading the ABM, right, table, so supplier and vendor, reading PO header and detail because we're doing our match, and we're doing receiving. So, and we also want to know your terms table, right? So if you have that filled in, we can determine, early pay discounts, things like that. And coding, and for non-PO invoices and special charges, we have to have access to your table to be able to, so that users know what the, we don't want them to have to leave the system to go figure out what the geocode is. Because remember, all that's going to happen up front. So we have access to your GL accounts. And by we, I mean the system has access to that to perform coding for, special charges, for any coding that you need to do interactively. So why is it important? I told you before, it basically, as soon as something occurs, it triggers and allows IntelliChief to perform its match, to determine, to create the voucher, to to do a lookup, things like that. Right. So in a three-way match, a great example is all of us here get the invoice as soon as we order something, right? And so you'll get that, we read it, we go and check. Well, after that, if our, we get a partial shipment, or if some of our stuff isn't received, that could be days or weeks, or could, who knows how long that is. So what a user would have to do, or what your users have to do today, right, is they keep going in and checking, depending on what ERP system it is. And so the invoice can't be matched because the stuff hasn't been received. So there's several ERPs that folks have to actually key in the invoice to check receipts. And so if it's not there, they back it out, put the invoice aside, and say waiting for receipts in a tray on their desk, right? Well, we got to avoid all that. And that's what real time helps you do, is it's checking for you, and it will only notify you after a certain amount of time, or whatever your business process says. So real time, it's doing that all on its own, right? It's immediately attempting to do the match and process that thing for you. So what if there is an exception, right? So, and if you're on this call and you're an AP, you're like, wait a minute, we have exceptions, right? Well, of course. So if there is an error with an invoice for something, right? I told you we protect the system. We can't create a voucher with that data. So what we'll do is route the invoice to the appropriate person or individual, and we include a series of reason codes that identify why an invoice has been stopped and what needs to be done to ensure that it can move, right? And these are what we call reason codes, same thing that you would sort of do. You probably have it on a page in your office that says what the various codes are. So here you can see somebody got an invoice, this brilliant repair thing came in, we read it, did all the stuff we do, and it determined that it was a duplicate invoice up here in the invoice issue area. And it's just notifying the user that this has already been processed, and what do you want to do with it? Now you could just say, hey, I want you to automatically delete that. I don't want the user to see that. But in this example, we didn't. But there's tons of different ones in there. So here are and I'll just page through these so you can see some examples of some of the kinds of reason codes that you might see, right? Quantity price adjustment. I need to route this over to purchasing. A due date is required. So it's giving the user a reason code so that they know exactly what thing to fix versus having to, rekey the whole thing or do any of those kinds of, manual steps. So those are how you handle exceptions. So the matching, as we've been talking about, is done in tandem between your core system and IntelliChief. We'll identify PO number, item number ID, receiving quantity, all the stuff that is required by the line of your core ERP system to create the voucher in the system. We also keep track of open PO quantities, right? So if you're one of the folks online that uses blanket POs, things like that, we keep track of that, and I'm going to show you in a second what that looks like. But we keep track of open PO quantity, receiving quantities when available, and when those lines are matched. The match methods we use, these are up to you. Again, you can pick one or all or combination of these: exact match, first in, first use, combination. Again, these are the decisions that your users are making interactively today that we set up in advance so that when this kind of invoice comes in, it automatically executes on the match method that you choose. We can also do variances, right? I want to accept an invoice if it's within a line item within a percent, amount, or type, right? So anything that we can do to get automatic or straight through processing without user intervention. So what's matching? Why is that a thing, right? Why is that important? Well, it's critical for straight through process. Straight through is automation. Right? This is where you want to get to because users are not having to do things interactively. I don't have them keying anything anymore. I don't have them moving paper around, checking fields, all that stuff. If we can do the match, you don't have to do anything. So the only thing users are working on is things, real exceptions, right? Where there is a issue with the purchase order or something like that. So let me give you a couple challenges, if you will, or things that come up and how we handle them, because you guys probably see these all the time. So a very common one is unit measure, right? Here's my purchase order, and in the real world, the greatest thing would be is over on my PO, I ordered a quarter inch shank as my description, the item number matches, and on the right-hand side, my unit measure is exactly the same, right? That's the easiest example, and everything matches. Part numbers are good, unit measure for quantity is good, price on line amount's good, we're good to go. We can do that immediately, get that thing to create a voucher right out of the gate on that line. Now, what's more challenging and more realistic, particularly if you're a manufacturer, right, and buying raw materials, is this. So here, the item number and description, right, they're the same sort of in all these. But the unit price, line amount, right? The unit measure on the vendor invoice is totally different, right? It's a quantity of 100. They sell it in cases. It's per carton. It's packs, whatever that thing is, right? Here's another example. I ordered 1 pound bags of refined sugar. I ordered 4,400, and they sell it in metric tons. So I send a PO for 4,400 pounds, and they send me an invoice for metric tons. Well, traditionally, these two do not match, right? This purchase order does not match that invoice, so you would think that stops. We want to increase straight through. We don't want users to have to do math on something that definitely matches and the prices are the same. So what we do is we use this cross-reference table and algorithm to normalize this data so the user doesn't have to do it. So in the background, when this invoice comes in, it looks at the PO and receipts, and it does a whole huge number of calculations automatically without the user involved to say, is this in fact correct? So I don't have to present the user with some kind of thing, some kind of exception. Maximizing the automation to what truly matches, because at the end of the day, these do match, right? But only an individual looking at traditionally would be able to determine that. So now what if something doesn't match or I have special charges or things like that? I mentioned earlier we're keeping track of receipt quantities, et cetera, out there, your PO and receipt quantities ordered. So this is what it looks like. And this is a screen within the IntelliChief tool called AP Voucher 123. And what this has done is over on the left-hand side there, you can see the invoice. On the right-hand side, you can see the PO and receipt quantities available. And there's a couple other tabs, but down the bottom, what it did is it auto-matched all these lines, okay? So those are matched. Now, it presented the user with 2 pieces of information that did not match, okay? And so the sales tax is not coded and it wasn't on the invoice, so they're gonna have to code that or do something with that charge. At the top, you have another item there, right? And you see the invoice line amount there is 21,000, but we only ordered 2,100. So that is clearly something that the PO varies from the invoice significantly. And so it's presenting it to the user so that they have to do something. Maybe we call the vendor, maybe we create a credit, whatever your business process associated around this does. Okay. The other thing is item cross-reference. So some of you folks on the call might have a item number cross-reference, so ordering part number versus invoice part number, your vendor's part number, stored in a table in your ERP, and that's okay. we'll read that cross-reference table, right? However, some of you might not. So what generally the cross-reference table does is it matches the ordering part number to the invoice part number from the supplier, so you can automatically determine whether that is in fact the same thing. The problem is it's typically set up when a vendor is set up, and so the table is seldom used, and it's almost never maintained. I think we may have found one person where it was being maintained on a consistent basis. Well, why do I care about that? Because it's important in terms of getting more and more invoices straight through. So most tools only, again, similar to the unit measure we looked at before, right? It only compares the two things. Well, if the part numbers don't match, they don't match. So that it stops and somebody has to do something. We want to avoid that. So what we'll do is we'll read your table if you're using it, right? The Infor cross-reference table, or we can actually give the user our own table for cross-referencing that they update while they're doing. So what you're doing is you're using machine learning. You're effectively teaching IntelliChief not to ask about that one ever again. And so it allows AP to save part numbers on the fly as we're encountering errors so that the system won't ask about that error next time. Okay, so this is what it might look like. So here's that coupling in here. Well, the two part numbers don't match. Well, it pops up a window for the user, routes it to a user and says, hey, do you want to add this item? We notice you changed it. Do you want to add this to the cross-reference table? Yes. Next time this line for that coupling comes in on an invoice, it's not even going to ask unless that changes again. Okay. And so the whole purpose of doing all this data normalization, if you will, is again to get straight through invoices. So what's it look like? Here's a customer where we determine that. We said we processed 260 invoices, and without normalization and cross-reference, they were able to get 141 straight through. 119 required some manual intervention. It might have just been one field that they had to change, but we don't want them to do anything if it truly matches. So with this concept of normalization and cross-reference, the things we just talked about, 254 of the same invoices went through, 6 required some level of manual intervention. So that's the kind of automation that we're really after, right? And so that's why it's important. Again, this is all about AP invoices, this presentation, but if you have customer orders and things like that, it's the same concept. Okay, non-PO. So non-PO, right, is different because we don't have the PO to compare to determine what in fact you ordered. So we're going to enforce your approval hierarchy, whatever that is. So you can send out reminders, right? You can say, we sent this over to plant manager Sally to approve 2 weeks ago, right? And you haven't done anything with it. Well, instead of having AP pick up the phone and chase it down or any of that, we can actually deliver reminders for those habitual late approvers and even do it from mobile, right? They can access their approving invoice, non-PO invoices, expense invoices, MRO, etc., from a tablet, a phone, whatever. And it's the same sort of interface. On the right, you can see how do you want to process this document, right? It'll show them the invoice if they want to take a look at it. They can even code it. If they turn the device sideways, again, this isn't an Infor LX screen or XA or what have you. They can turn the device sideways and code lines on it, and it will actually do a real-time lookup back to your GL and give them the correct GL code as they go to key it in, even if they are not a user in the Infor ERP that you guys use. All right, a lot of cool stuff. So next up, so if you are looking into this stuff, go out to our website. There's a buyer's guide for AP automation. You can look by your ERP system in most cases. Obviously, contact us if you have any unique things that you want to talk about. I use EAM system over here, and I got to be able to do that in addition to my Infor related stuff. That's perfectly okay. We can customize these types of things for you, but obviously we think it's critical. With that, I know I'm a couple minutes over, but I love to talk about AP in particular. But if you have any questions, I didn't say this at the beginning, but if you open up that tool on the right-hand side there, you can actually put any questions that you might have related to things we've discussed or anything else for that matter, and we'll make sure we can answer. I'll give a couple seconds, and if anyone has any questions. So I guess I didn't cover all the ERP systems we work in conjunction with. So again, you can check out our website. We've got a whole host of them there. That is not the limit though. But the ones that Infor were the solution partner, all releases of XA, BPCS, LX, System 21, PRMS. I'm missing some, but there's typically already a packaged application for them out there that we have. So give us a shout. Happy to talk about it. And it's all releases too. So say, for example, I'm talking about XA. It's not just IFM or eFinancials. It's, you know, AM, etc. Another question, can you do a four-way match? I didn't mention this in our in the presentation, but absolutely, we can do, if you have to match against a job number, quality, you have some type of quality inspection, whatever those other match documents that are required, we can absolutely do that. We have more than one customer. I can think of a prominent one in the process manufacturing side that does that exact thing. But so the answer is yes. You can match against any data that's there and even bring it up, or, you know, it kind of depends on what your business process is. So you'd have to walk us through, you know, what you want to happen. Because actually there's another one that's an Infor customer I just thought of, that some of their ones have to go through a match process and raw materials, others do not. So based on the invoice type, it does a three-way, and it waits on the fourth document for the specific kinds of invoices that have to have a fourth match. And in their case, it was something related to doing inspection. Any other questions? Another question about integrating to other ERPs other than Infor. So yeah, we do a lot of that because you know, a customer may use, you know, their core financials is or is not in a core Infor solution, and so maybe you actually do the invoice entry or create the voucher in one system, but it has to roll up to another. We can absolutely do that. Yeah, the IntelliChief is designed, again, as an ECM. It's a true enterprise content management system. So it can work in conjunction with multiple ERP systems and do all the same things we just described. It's just pulling data from different areas. Now, with the caveat, if it's something that we've never seen, you know, obviously the integrations that we have are Infor specific. So we have to check on the integrations for one of those other ones. Someone asks, is a matching done against a database or documents? It can be either. Okay, so in the case of the three-way match that I was just talking about, we're doing it on the data, right? We're reading the invoice, pulling the data out of it, and putting it into IntelliChief. Then we're reading the receipt table for whatever ERP and the PO table in that ERP, and we're doing the match against those three. Right? Somehow I have to have data. So if it's truly a document, then I'm going to need to get that document in electronic format and have an index that we need to match against. So we can either read that using capture, the OCR stuff that we talked about, or somebody's got to key it in, but somehow I have to get the data. Okay? So the easiest way is your system of record. If you have it in a table in your Infor ERP, then that's certainly the easiest way to do it. If not, like the invoice, for example, we got to get it out there somehow. Good question. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate everyone's time today. And you'll get a recording, I think, of this webinar, and you can listen to me babble a second time if you want to. Otherwise, thanks very much for joining me today. And again, head out to our website, IntelliChief.com, or talk to your Infor representative about IntelliChief, or feel free to call me anytime. Thanks very much.